I'm going to be quiet, and we're going to give the speaking stick, as it were, over to Matt. So you have the conch.
Oh, great. We could do one of those videos where we pass it around.
We have to know where we all each are on.
Yeah. I mean, I could do the makeover part of it too, because my wife is going to cut all my hair off today. So that's going to be nice. But hey, everybody, I'm Matt. I am primarily a lawyer at Greater Boston Legal Services, but I also know a little bit of Docassemble, and I think we have a lot of law students on here now, right, folks? Yes, someone nod, for the love of God. So I think I just want to share a little bit of my experience first. I, never had any software development experience before I started working with Quentin on Docassemble projects because I thought it would be helpful in my work. And, it's like 2 years later, and I'm both, contributing to this project, deploying things that are useful in my own job, and am able to find, people who want to, hire me to do things like this. So a lot of this is very, very useful skills in the legal profession, especially now. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn about interview order blocks and how to control the flow of questions in an interview. And everybody here, I believe you told me this morning, Quentin, has done like kind of a hello world exercise and has the ability to get into a playground. Is that right?
Should be. Let's just, Jack, were you able to get into the playground?
I haven't been able to get into the playground yet. I've been seeing all like the Docassembles about Docker and virtual machines, so that'd be actually helpful to learn how to get into the playground.
Let me just see. I think you might have just signed up and not have been given developer access yet. Yep.
Oh,
I'm going to just give you developer access right now.
Perfect.
Okay, you should now have developer access. So you should be able to see the playground. If you go to your little when you're logged in our Docassemble thing, you should see the playground.
And for folks who aren't already, you should log in. And why don't we just briefly, it's always good to review. Why don't we go over how to do that? Everybody's on the Suffolk development server, I think. So to navigate there, you go to apps-dev.suffolklitlab.org. You get this screen, and then you can sign in here with your username and password. I'll just show you, if you're not signed in, you'll get this screen. Use a password manager. And then you just click here where you see your email address and go to Playground. And if I could get a thumbs up on the Zoom when people are in, that would be great. Thank you, David, for modeling the behavior.
This is probably also a good time for you to figure out what is the desktop arrangement you like. I like to take the Zoom channel and sort of make the window big and put it over on the right, and then open up a browser all on the left, so I don't have to flip back and forth between them. I don't know. Just use this time to think about how you want that. And I'm sorry, Matt, not stepping on your toes. I'll be quiet.
No. In fact, I wanted to just take the moment to encourage and say to folks that we should just everybody jump in. I'm definitively not a teacher. I made that choice explicitly when I went to law school. I was about to go learn how to teach math in New York City and decided to not do that. So you can tell where my skills lie. All right. So what we're going to learn about today, again, is how to control the flow of an interview logic block. And if anybody has any questions, just please stop. Let me know. Just jump right in. So you should see here we have a little kind of practice interview here that is just a couple of questions. And you'll see we have one mandatory block, right? And when you normally are dealing with Docassemble, the way it asks questions is it looks at this mandatory block and it looks at the variables it needs to kind of complete that mandatory block. So here you have favorite trashy show and you have favorite critically acclaimed show, right? And so let's run this and see what happens. So we get this question: one person's trash is another person's treasure. What's your favorite television show that's kind of trash? For me, it's Doctor Who. Definitely kind of trash, but I love it.
I'm going to take issue.
I knew you would. And then, what's your favorite critically acclaimed television show? Riverdale should be a trash answer, actually, but The Good Place, I think, is pretty well critically acclaimed, so I'll put that in there. And you watch Doctor Who. Why? Nice, you like The Good Place. Me too. Now, you'll see that the order of these questions is maybe a little funky. We have this header here, let's talk about television, that sort of indicates that it might be a primary screen. And that's because of the way that Docassemble figures out how to ask questions. Docassemble was originally designed by Jonathan Pyle, who is kind of the creator of Docassemble, to not need to determine what order questions come in. So Docassemble just takes this block, says, okay, it's mandatory. That means I need this variable and this variable to complete the interview. So I'll go hunting for them. And there are a variety of rules for how Docassemble determines which order it seeks these variables in. But in my opinion, and if anyone else disagrees, you can feel free to jump in. It's not that important to know them or to worry about them, because A, they're a little bit confusing, in my opinion, and B, they're designed so that you don't have to know them, right? You're not supposed to think about that necessarily. But the reason we don't do it that way, that we don't use Docassemble's normal behavior, is because for this kind of project where we're trying to design something that has a very specific user experience, you probably want the interview questions to happen in a certain way. I mean, even this small interview, you can see, right? We have our question laid out, and Docassemble goes hunting, and it basically shows this question that we probably want to have second first. So how do we fix this? How do we make it so that we can actually control the order that we have the questions in? So what we do is this. We switch up what our mandatory block is. We take this question out. And we put a mandatory block here that looks like this: mandatory true, code, and then has these variables. Can anybody tell me what they think is going to happen here when we hit save and run?
And he will not move on until someone says something. I'm sorry, I'm being very forceful.
No, that's fine. Drink my water.
So how do we want to do that? There's so many people, depending upon your view, where you might not be able to see your screen.
Yeah.
Matt, what do you suggest? Do you want people just to unmute and say something, or?
You can say something. That's a great idea, David.
Maybe repeat the question.
Sure. What do we think is going to happen when we hit save and run here?
Can anyone remember what the code block will do? What are those?
Have we
those underscore things?
Part of the problem. Do we know what code blocks are?
They were covered, but as you said, reviewing is always good.
All right. I think we can be kind. What about that, David?
Always be kind, man.
Always
be kind.
Right. I have a coworker who has something on her door that says "be kinder than necessary," which I think is just that's a choice as a lawyer to have that attitude. So what's going to happen is this is the only mandatory block, right? So it's the only block that Docassemble in a really real way cares about. And code means that this is Python code, and Python code gets read from top to bottom, right? So Docassemble is going to see this mandatory block, it's going to see the code block here, and it's going to say, okay, the first thing I need to look for is favorite critically acclaimed show. So it's going to look for favorite critically acclaimed show, which will be answered by this question. And then it'll say, great. Okay, I have a value for critically acclaimed show, right? Now, what do I need next? Favorite trashy show. Then it's going to go here and talk about our favorite trashy show. So let's see how that goes in order.
I don't know. I want to know how people think. Uh-oh. Well, never mind.
No. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, David.
What's gonna happen first? Do we have to do cold call? I don't want to do cold call.
Sorry, say that again, David.
I was wondering if we were gonna have to go with cold calls. I don't want anyone to have like flashbacks to like the school year, but
Socratic method. Michael's got something.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that it's probably going to ask the question about the critically acclaimed show first, and then go to the trashy show.
Yeah. Here's another question as a follow-up for Michael, because you were silly enough to volunteer. Are we going to see this screen?
After the trashy show, no.
And why is that?
Because it doesn't have a mandatory.
Right. Let's go through it. That's absolutely right. Or I think it's right. We have our critically acclaimed show here. We have our trashy show here. And then we get an error. And here's why, right? Because this is the only mandatory block, right? It says mandatory true. We got our definition for, do we not have a back button anymore? No. We got our definition for our critically acclaimed show. We got our definition for our trashy show. And as far as Docassemble was concerned, we're done, right? Game over. Don't need to ask any more questions because that's all we asked Docassemble to do. Does anybody have any ideas about how we could get Docassemble to show that last screen?
Would it be possible just to add a mandatory to the question? Like just have it mandatory for each section? So have a mandatory above the trashy show as well?
So mandatory here?
Yeah.
Let's try it. So now it's asking this one first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same behavior.
Okay.
But it was a good thought. Any other ideas? So I'll give you a hint, and this might not, this might not be enough, but we need to give this block a variable for this to look for, right? Have we talked about event blocks at all? Event, not blocks. So we haven't done that. All right. So then this is completely new, and there's no way that you'd learn how to do it. So basically, we can put a variable down here for critically acclaimed show because that's what we're looking for, right? We can put favorite critically acclaimed show because we know that variable will appear in this question. It's what this question wants to find. The problem with this question is it's really different. It doesn't ask for any new information. It just shows information that we've already gotten. And Docassemble realizes that that's going to be a problem that we have sometimes. So all you have to do when you have a question like that, where you're not asking for new information, you're just showing old information, or rather one of the ways you can handle this is with event. If you do event, you can sort of almost give the block a name, right? That you can then put into a block like this. So let's call our event judge user, right? Okay. And then if we have
am I muting just so that you can know I giggled?
Oh, good. Fantastic. So this variable might seem a little obscure, this name, but is this going to work? Judge user's taste. Is that a valid variable name?
I'm not sure that's a judgment that that we have covered. I don't think we have the domain knowledge yet in this stage of the process to know that.
Sounds good. Don't use apostrophes. if you can avoid it.
Anywhere in code, ever. Or in your text. Just don't use apostrophes.
Just construct your sentences in whatever obtuse way you have to not use an apostrophe.
Be like commander data and unable to say contractions.
Right, exactly. Because it will cause errors in your code.
No one's going to get that because that's way too old. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
It sounds like you and I like the same trashy television, do you? Ah, that's not trash. Okay. So just to show you, if you hit save and run, eventually, oh, well, no, it's not a mandatory block. Never mind. So if we have this event, judge user, can anyone think of a way that we might now be able to get it to display, get this screen to display by putting something in this block here?
Keeping in mind that it's something kind of like a variable.
Put it in the mandatory, right where you're beneath favorite trashy show.
Exactly. So if we put judge user here, now we have an event, right? We have a sort of variable that we can put in our mandatory code block. We hit save and run. We're going to get the critically acclaimed television show question first, which makes sense because that's our first one here. And then your favorite television show that's kind of trash, Riverdale. Again, that makes sense. That's our second question here. And then we see this last screen, judge user, because we have judge user, we do the event, judge user. Now, what if I got something I didn't expect, right? So what if I wanted to, what if I had a problem, I wasn't seeing what I wanted, and I wanted to know how Docassemble had gotten to this question? If you haven't covered it already, a really great source to kind of figure out where your bugs are or what's happening when you're just starting out with Docassemble is to hit this little source button. And it specifically says the tooltip, how this question came to be asked. We have a bunch of plain language metrics that are great, but then you see here, this is how Docassemble got here to the question. So it tried to run the mandatory code and it needed a definition of judge user. And then it shows you the actual text of the question, right? So that's great so that you can know how Docassemble went and got the questions that you're asking. And then another even more valuable, arguably, thing that Docassemble will let you do is this show variables and values. And what you can do here is you can see what Docassemble at this moment in time thought your variables were, right? So you can go here and you can see, for example, if I search trashy, you can say, oh, yep, it did define trashy as Riverdale. And then favorite critically acclaimed show, it did define that as The Good Place. Sometimes this can be really helpful if you're wondering if Docassemble ever got to a question that you asked, if you're getting values that you don't expect. It's a really, really great debugging tool. And it looks like, I think David might have something that he wants to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say maybe it was worth giving a little context about what you were just looking at.
Sure.
So that's a very common format of sort of key value pairs, something that you see a lot. So I assume that looks like valid JSON.
It is.
And so just know that basically what you've got is you've got the name of a thing on the left, a colon, and then the value of the thing. And the value of those things can, here they're mostly strings, which is just computer speak for like letters and numbers. Sometimes they can be numerical values. Sometimes they can be, you can see timestamps, etc.
And if there are folks that have experience with this format and JSON, just know it can be, and if you don't understand what I'm about to say, don't worry about it. It can be a little bit difficult to tell if, when you're dealing with sort of dictionaries or with attributes of an object. So just sort of watch out for that. The JSON kind of renders it the same. Great. Okay. So any questions so far? Wonderful. Okay, so if we wanted to change the order of these questions so that Trashy Show came before Critically Acclaimed Show, how would we do that?
Could you just switch them in the code section?
Absolutely, right? If I have Trashy Show and I just delete this, right, where do I want to put it now?
I think you would like enter down, so it'd be in the 19 column or row. Right there.
Yep. And that'll do it. And we see Trashy Show first. And I think you've gone over this, but another really handy thing, a tip to know for developing Docassemble, and pretty much the reason I will develop in the playground here as opposed to using another code editor, is that you can actually do this on the fly, right? If I want to change this back and put Critically Acclaimed Show at the top, I can hit save. And I don't actually have to run the interview from the beginning again. I can just hit refresh in my browser. And you'll see that it updates automatically. Now, be aware that if you get complicated interviews, sometimes this will lead to some unexpected behavior. If you think you've fixed something and it doesn't show up after doing that refresh trick, before you start banging your head against a wall, do try to run the interview from the beginning. This is something that I feel like works way more than half the time. And for simple interviews, it works pretty much all the time, but it's just something to be aware of. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is Quentin, Michelle, or anybody there hasn't been any going over of conditional logic, right?
We did just a little bit of conditional logic in our last
Hey,
session.
hey, Matt, before you do that, I have a question.
Sure.
This Lance. Why is at lines 11 to 15, why is one question? Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. I missed. So your two questions are individual questions. That's the sub question.
Yeah.
It's just text. It's not.
Right, absolutely. Yes, and so right here, you're absolutely right. This is just text. It's telling it to put the value of this variable into text. So this is something I don't know if you guys have gone over before. This is a syntax called Mako, I believe. And if you ever want to put the values of your variables into text on a question screen, this is what you do. Use a $sign, a curly brace, your variable, and then a curly brace. So again, if you're not picking up all of this, right, that's totally fine. I designed this explicitly to kind of show a couple side hidden tricks here, a couple little mini lessons hidden in here, but the real thing that we're trying to get is this mandatory block. So just concentrate the most on that. So a lot of times, and especially in this project for mass access, we might want to get a little more complicated here. We might not want to ask certain questions depending upon the context of users' earlier answers, right? So, for example, what if a person doesn't watch television, right? So we might have a question like this one. And I'm going to put this just anywhere because since we have this block, it doesn't really matter where it is. But you do always want to make sure that you have these 3 dashes separating it. And we have this new question here. Hey, do you like television? And we have a new variable, user likes television. And we have this field type called yes, no. Can anybody tell me, so let me just show you how that works, right? Well, I'll show you once we have the stuff in here.
Can I just interject for a second, and maybe we'll start a practice of putting questions in a semi-logical order, vertically, in a visually, so that they might be easier for other coders to follow as well when looking at your code.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's one that I've debated, and I never got to talk to you about it, Matt. But
no, and I think
as a practice, right?
Right. I think it's important to point out too that not everything that happens in as a natural kind of consequence of pedagogy and teaching, not everything that happens in these lessons is going to ultimately be best practices, right?
It's true. This is true.
I would never, ever, ever put this question in the middle of a block right here, because as Michelle intimated, it just doesn't make sense, right? As you're reading it. As somebody's trying to debug your code, it's inconsiderate, bordering on blasphemous to do this. So, I would put it either sort of at the top or the bottom. I think there's probably the top, because I think there's arguments for both, because Docassemble reads from the bottom to top, but people tend to read from top to bottom. So I would probably put it at the top right here. I think it's really great that you brought that up though, Michelle, because it let me make that point, and you were also 100% right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. So we have this new mandatory code block here, and it's more complicated. So we have if not user likes television, kick out user, and then we go on to the rest, right? There's another way to write this, if not. You could write if user likes television equals false. There's not, man, I think, I don't know if they're actually equivalent, but for our purposes, they're equivalent. So you could
For any practical purpose, it's equivalent.
For any practical purpose, they're equivalent. So if user likes television equals false, I tend to like if not user likes television, because it's a little more human readable. It reminds me of when I was studying for the LSAT, and I used to put the little not symbol in front of things to negate them. So let's go through how this runs. If we hit save and run, what question is going to get asked first? What variable is it going to look for first?
I would look for whether or not they like television, right?
Exactly.
Because it's on the top.
Right. And so it's important to kind of highlight this, right? That with these code blocks here that are mandatory, you don't just have to list out the variables. As long as you're using the variable, it'll look for it, right? So it's first going to ask if they like television, right? Hey, do you like television, right? And if we click no, if we click no, what's it going to look for next?
If you click no, does it just kick you out immediately, or does it keep going?
Well, it's going to look for kick out user. The problem is we haven't defined kick out user, right? So Docassemble doesn't know what kicking someone out means, but you're absolutely right. It goes down here to this variable, kick out user. So let's write a question to define that, right? I tend to put, and Michelle, Quentin, anybody feel free to jump in here. I tend to put my kick out questions on the bottom. I'm so glad you brought that up, Michelle, because I think it's good to discuss these conventions. Right?
Thank you.
So I don't, I tend to have kick out questions in my interview, and it's an important concept to know for legal interviews, because it's kind of a disclaimer in a way, right? Like you get to decide what the purpose of your interview is, and if you don't want somebody to use your interview for something that's not within that purpose, you can design kick out screens. For example, I have an interview that I've programmed that's helping people figure out, if they get sued, what's going to happen on a debt, but it doesn't cover mortgages. So I have a kick out screen that covers mortgages. It doesn't cover tax debt. So I have a kick out screen that covers that, right? So we're going to use the event tag again, because on a kick out screen, you're not going to ask for more information, right? So you probably need to use event again. And so what's going to happen now, again, we don't have to restart the interview. We can just save. And now hit refresh. And if we say, hey, do you like television? And hit no, say I'm not really interested in talking to you. These buttons, exit and restart, are kind of good standard buttons to have on an exit screen in Docassemble. If you go to the Docassemble documentation, which is great to read, that'll tell you exactly what it is that they do. Just know that they have special behavior. Restart will bring you back to the interview, and exit will kick you out of the interview and also erase all the user's session data, I guess. So their answers won't be saved. So we can just hit restart here, actually, and go back to the start of the interview. Now, if, again, we have our question, hey, do you like television? Yes or no. And if the user does like television, right, what do you think it's going to ask next? So if we say, if user likes television is true, what is going to be the next thing that happens?
Would it just drop down to favorite show?
Yeah, exactly. So we hit save and run. Or go back to the screen, which is up here. Hey, do you like television? We hit yes, and we go, let's talk about television, right? We don't do this kick out user because this wasn't defined, right? This wasn't, we didn't meet the condition, right? So we skip over this and go down here. Any questions about that so far? There's a lot here.
How about, as imposed of any questions, let's just say, what questions do people have?
Right, that's a
It's
great
a little
idea.
different framing.
I love it, David.
If
I have a
nobody
quick
has a
question.
question, I have a question.
Caroline, I always love answering questions from you because they're always.
I also think Maria had a question in there too.
Oh, yeah,
Let
Just
Maria go
cue it up.
See, I can't see everybody, so do just jump in. So
Maria,
go right ahead.
If people want to raise your hands through the Zoom interface, I can try and keep an eye out for that. That means you click on participants, and there's a little hand symbol underneath all the names where you can go raise hand. And I can try and keep an eye on that.
That would be great, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Maria.
Can you scroll down a tiny bit, Matt? Scroll down.
Hey.
I was gonna ask if you had moved judge user up above favorite critically acclaimed show, would it still run the same way as if judge user was below? Like, does it automatically try to solve, because judge user needs trashy show and critically acclaimed show?
I don't think so.
So,
but let's find out. So Mariah's asking a question that's really smart. Sorry, Mariah, I interrupted you. It sounded like you were still talking, maybe.
no, that was it.
So we know that judge user needs favorite trashy show and favorite critically acclaimed show. But what if we ask it in this mandatory block by mistake, basically, before those questions? Let's see what happens. I think we're going to get an error. I don't think it's smart enough. Hey, do you like television? Yes. Oh, it is.
yeah.
Great. So what's happening here is Docassemble is defaulting to its normal, like, looking for, it kind of, I guess it just defaults to its normal behavior for looking for variable answers.
Yeah.
So
And by the time it gets down there in the code, it won't care about those questions anymore because they'll be defined.
they'll be defined already.
Those values, rather, those variables.
Right. So that's,
Yeah, so that's an important thing to remember, is that what we're trying to do is to control the question order, but it's not literally going to show the screens in the order we write all of the time.
right.
It's fun.
It's fun. I mean, I think if you're interested in this, everybody on this call, I think, who designs Docassemble interviews designs it this way. But it's interesting to think about the fact that we are sort of coding around how Docassemble is designed to actually work. Docassemble was not built with this in mind. So, that is something that you run up with in coding sometimes. And so your mileage may vary. it might not work exactly how you expect all the time.
So you actually are using some of the Docassemble features, because you're saying if not user likes television, which is like just using judge user instead of favorite critically acclaimed show and favorite trashy show, because user likes television needs an answer before you evaluate if not, right? So if we were doing it literally, you'd say user likes television, if not user likes television, kick out user. So you are sort of using a Docassemble way of thinking, the computer thinking there.
Yeah.
Right?
And, you know, I think again to that point and to Michelle's earlier point, right? Like, you know, I'm a self-taught lawyer, right? Everybody, there are lots of different ways to get this to go.
You're a self-taught lawyer, Matt?
You mean coder, right? You went to law school, didn't you?
You know, this is being recorded, right?
It is. That's okay. You used to be able to just read for the bar.
Didn't they make a television show about you? Suits, isn't it? That's what it's called.
I'm a self-taught coder. I actually use, David, you've probably said this already, but I love this framing of what a lot of us do. I'm a better coder than most lawyers and a better lawyer than most coders. Really,
I like that.
yeah. If you kind of parse those sentences, though, that isn't saying much, right? Necessarily. Because, you know, if you've met a lot of lawyers, a lot of them are Luddites. So long roundabout way of saying that there are different ways of doing this. And I think that's
there are a million different ways to skin this cat. Even in regular imperative code, there are plenty of ways to skin cats and plenty of ways to surprise yourself with the behavior of your program.
all right.
So here's my real question. You know, in your kickout screens, I think sometimes it would be nice to have a back, because sometimes people click things because they want to see where they would, I mean, not use the back in the, which you know, actually now you have a back. Oh, you didn't have the back in the error, but sometimes
You
people
tend to not have the back on the last screen. You do have it here, though. Sometimes you do.
right.
But
Yeah.
a nice way to get around that is this responsive, Caroline, is the restart button.
Yeah, but the thing is, what happens if you spend half an hour answering questions and you go down a path to see what's going to happen? You don't want to start the whole interview all over again. And that's what restart does, right? Takes you back to the beginning.
Yeah, it does, but I think that's on the designer, right? You probably want to put your pickout questions at the start of the interview. If you
Wait just a moment, because it's a little hard to hear you for some reason.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that's on the designer potentially, though, because if you're to the extent you can, you want to put your kickout questions at the start of the interview to avoid that very experience.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why we ask first, hey, do you like television? Just the way you might in a normal conversation. Like, hey, do you watch TV? If so, I really want to talk to you about Riverdale, which is true, but it's great.
Caroline makes a good point, though. So another design you could do is to add a back button there. And I think in our interviews, we're having the back button always show as a button next to the next, which we've renamed next from continue. But you can add it on a question by question basis if that's what you prefer to.
And I think we're just starting. I'm sure a lot of you are having a reaction that I often did when I'm starting, which is like, well, I'm not really worried about that right now. I just want to get the damn thing to run, which is very, very fair, right? You do have to worry first about getting the thing to run, especially when you're starting out on this. But you will get here to a point where you're actually designing around user experience as opposed to just making it work, please God, work faster than you think. But if for now, when you're just starting out, you just want to say, like, please, I don't want to worry about that, just get it to run. That's okay, I think. So Quentin and I were talking before this in that a lot of the norms and philosophies around being a lawyer are very different from being a coder. As a lawyer, you're expected to, with your one shot, get the perfect product. You don't iterate in the law because you win or you lose. But That's not the case with coding and with programming. You can always iterate, you can always make things better, you can always ask for help. And you should. I think a good rule of thumb that Michelle taught me actually, and that Quentin uses as well, is if you spend more than half an hour figuring out how to do something, just ask for help. And that can be on the Slack, that can be, you know, through Google or Stack Overflow. And I actually think that Jonathan, the creator of Docassemble, did a really good job writing documentation for Docassemble that's approachable to lawyers. This is not necessarily something that you have to do at all, but I actually kind of like read it. I sat down and read the documentation, which you just couldn't do for most code, but you can for Docassemble, and I think it's quite helpful. What other questions do people have?
So let's just make that clear.
Go ahead, David.
Those questions. Thank you. Those questions cannot be. We can open it up. It doesn't have to be questions responsive to this training. It can be, oh, this piqued an interest. Like, can I do X, Y, and Z with Docassemble? So just any questions.
Yeah.
You also don't have to raise your hand. You can also just unmute.
And
yeah,
if not, I have one more trick that we can show people.
I like tricks.
Right.
Yeah.
Love them.
All right. So let's look at this. Gotta add something to our mandatory code block. First, this looks terrible, but it's a great example of the wonder and the horror of coding in this playground. The playground wraps your text, and so like you may not even be seeing this on your screen. Out of curiosity, was the text wrapped on your screen? Probably not.
It was. No, it was.
Okay.
We're just seeing it's like a window into your computer.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So it's wrapped, that's fine. If you maximize it, it's not going to be wrapped. That can be ugly. Just watch out for that coding in the playground. But we have this now. If not user likes television, kick out user. If favorite critically acclaimed show equals The Good Place, user is person of culture. And then we're going to do another code block. And this is a lot. We're adding a lot here. So if you don't entirely follow, that's fine. And we're actually going to change the judge user question to demonstrate a couple things. Because if you can master these simple techniques, you can really create some pretty featured Docassemble interviews. Where's our final question? Judge user. All right, we're gonna run it and then go through the questions step by step. So save and run. Hey, do you like television? If we do no, it's gonna kick us out. So let's restart. Hey, do you like television? Yes. Let's talk about television. What's your favorite critically acclaimed television show? Good Place. And then what's your favorite television show that's kind of trash? Riverdale. This is not part of the exercise.
Improvisation. That's what life's about. That's what coding's about.
Ah, I think I know what I did. I forgot my event tag. There we go. Some people may have noticed. Let me delete this. Look over here, right?
You gotta, yeah.
Can people not see it, Michelle?
No, we can see it. You just have to save after deleting it is what
Right.
we'll have to do.
Over here, and now I'm gonna delete this. We see we had this error before that said there was reference to a variable judge user that could not be looked up. That was because I didn't have this event tag, and if I save, one of the nice features of the playground is it'll show you these undefined names. So this isn't always true, but if you have something in red here as an undefined name, your interview probably won't run to the end. Do you think that's fair, Michelle and Quentin? You get to some funny stuff when you have modules, including other interviews, but for basic interviews.
It's a good flag that you have to pay attention to something, I would say for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Michelle?
If you're working on a single interview, yeah, I think for now that's a really good guidepost.
Yeah. If you have interviews within interviews and stuff like that, it's not necessarily the case, but for us, it is. So if I have judge user here though, and I click save, you'll see that it disappears. So now I should be good to go. And again, I can just hit refresh here now. Okay, good. Riverdale, Doctor Who. Oh, wow, me too. Have you seen the series finale? So good, just a perfect ending. So this is something that came up because of a specific answer that we did. So let's look at our new judge user question. You see, we have some conditional logic here now. And this is using Mako as well. And one of the things that I found really intimidating about Docassemble when I first started was that it really has a lot of different languages in it. But trust me, if you're interested in this stuff and you stick with it, this part of the code, learning where the percentage sign goes and where there's a colon and when you have to do end if, you will gain techniques to learn this stuff faster as you go. Kind of the first one you do is really hard, but this part gets easier and easier and easier. And then you can kind of get to the truly complicated and really fun parts that are design.
And if I can interject on that, actually, to just add a little bit.
Please.
One of the most important skills when you're learning to code is learning to Google or to search. And here it would be search the Docassemble documentation. No coder remembers all of the keywords. No coder remembers. Every time I go to a different language, Python isn't my language, I go and look up how things work. I don't remember, I just know the type of thing I'm looking for. So learning enough vocabulary to find what you need is really going to be more important than memorizing every single character and piece of syntax.
Right. And I wrote this all the code that I used for this lesson, I wrote out ahead of time because this is pretty simple stuff for Docassemble. I couldn't guarantee that I'd do it right if I didn't have the documentation open. So it's Michelle is absolutely right.
And you can still write fantastic code. You don't have to know every nook and cranny.
Right. So we can put conditional logic in our question text, right? To see, so if user is person of culture, then you'll see this text. Otherwise, you'll see the normal text, right? So let's go through that again, right? Here, what if we do something besides The Good Place? What's your favorite critically acclaimed television? So something's in the chat.
Over the Garden Wall, how about that?
Yeah. Cool. Over the Garden Wall.
That's a little long, but.
Okay, trashy television show, and we get the normal text here. That's because we have this user, person of culture, blah, this conditional logic. What's going on here? Oh my goodness, Matt, I don't understand. What's happening is we have our mandatory code block. It's saying, if not user likes television, kick out user. We already did that part. What's key is here. If favorite critically acclaimed show is equal to The Good Place, we go to this new thing. User is a person of culture. And that's this new code block here where we define the variable user is a person of culture, right? This is not best practice, like the way necessarily that it's structured. One of the things I wanted to do for you though is that if you're tinkering on your own and going kind of beyond this lesson and making your own things, you might run into a problem that I had a lot and that Quentin had to teach me to get around when I was starting, which is that you don't want to assign variable values in here, right? So you could do this. Instead of having this code block, if favorite critically acclaimed show equals The Good Place, you could just do this. User is a person of culture equals true. That would work 9 times out of 10. The problem comes in the way Docassemble processes code, and that it many times will read this code block multiple times without you knowing it. And that in more complicated interviews can lead to errors that are really hard to debug. So I think if you can just learn this habit of never using a single equals sign basically in this mandatory interview order block, just break it out and put it in a new code block. And if you don't understand that, that's perfectly fine. This is an advanced tip, but I figured since we have the time, we'd go over it. And Michelle, do you agree that that's a good best practice? It's something that Quentin and I do, but I'm interested in your opinion too.
I think this is a technique that, a convention that Quentin and I, that I have been wanting to talk to Quentin about for a while. I knew something was lurking out there, but I didn't know what it was, and I really love it. Yeah. I love this idea. I need to think about it more, but I love this idea.
Yeah, because I think, and Michelle, you'll understand this, is that if you define it here, sometimes you just get weird stuff happening.
Well, sometimes the definition of your variable is just stuck behind an if statement that's never going to happen. Now, I would argue that the way you've written the code right now gets you into the same place.
It does.
So I would say that in this particular case, you have not circumvented that particular
what you actually want to do
flaw, but
this is what you want to do. So yeah.
But you have the else statement that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're repeating it actually, you know what, with the else statement, it does it. Oh, yeah, no, that's really nice.
Yeah.
The else statement really takes care of that, and you can contain that logic there. I like it.
How do you know that it's going to run the code in the non-mandatory code block?
Because defining this is in the mandatory block, and this code block is the only.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. That's where it gets its value.
Right. Exactly. But that's an excellent question, Caroline. And I think, and after this, we'll close for questions. It's helpful to realize that as far as the computer is concerned, variables without values are meaningless, right? It doesn't know what user is a person of culture is. So these all are sort of like question marks for the code. And so it's always going hunting around for something that will define it with a single equal sign, right? It's always looking for that single equal sign in a way to define what exactly this is. And that's why it looks down here. It says, I need to know what user is a person of culture means. Where does something exist that tells me what it means? Oh, there's a single equal here. I'll go there. Okay, so I think we have a hard out at 2. And so I can answer a couple more questions. I'm also available. I'm available less on the Slack now because I'm back at my day job. But folks can also feel free to email me at mbrooks@gbls.org and or hit me up on the Slack. You can just mention me and I will come running. Thanks for the time, and thank you for working on this project. It is really cool and fun, and it is making a difference.
That was really great,
Yes.
Matt. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for that.
Thank you, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
So for anyone who is, I'm going to have to do the hard out because I was the host here, but for anyone who is looking for something more to do today and more to the point, more to do tomorrow morning, if you're one of our sort of 35-hour folks, then my suggestion would be, here, I'm just going to quickly take over the share screen. My suggestion would be, and I think you can sort of see yourselves there, would be to go ahead and the volunteer guide, you want to read all the way through that. At the very end, there's a link to our current form generation workflow, and you'll want to read through that too. That's not going to, occupy all of your time, but what you can feel empowered to do is to go ahead and you can take one of the PDFs without changing it. And we might have to talk to some folks about how to grab them off Trello. And you can play around with the wizard that's discussed here, and it'll generate some YAML code you can play around with in the in your sandbox, and you can just play around. I think our goal of the management team will be tomorrow after at the stand-up to be able to say, hey, not just grab some random PDF and do something, but here are some PDFs that you really can dive into, and then we'll pair people up, and then you can help each other out. But if you're looking for something just to get if you want to explore, the thing I would suggest exploring is running the wizard and playing around with that output from the wizard, and that'll give you a good sense of what you do and don't understand about the workflow. Does anyone want to add to something like that? Anything that they think might be good for exploring? Quentin might have some insights, or Michelle.
Yeah, I really like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try running it. It might not even run, just so you know. It might not run because depending on the complexity of the PDF and the interview. But yeah, seeing how it does or doesn't run, making it break, making it work again, all excellent ways to dip a toe in.
And don't get frustrated if it doesn't work and you're like, I don't even know where to start, because this is way more stuff in it than what we've been seeing.
There is a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Do we know if people have PDF editors on their machines, or a way for them to get them?
I think Suffolk has a site license, right? That's what we found in our first phase when we were still in the spring semester.
We'll get folks if they don't. But to be explicitly clear, you don't have to be editing the PDFs to try this out. You can grab one of the pre-edited, pre-processed PDFs. And again, mostly what I'm doing here is just trying to enable you to do the thing, which I think is sometimes hard to do, which is just to poke around and don't worry about breaking anything. You're just going to download something and play around with it in your sandbox. You're not going to be able to do anything, well, without trying a little hard. You're not going to be able to end the world. Anything you are playing around with, aside from maybe taking up memory on the dev server at some point, is you can't mess things up too badly. So feel empowered to play around.
And if you
that means just clicking things sometimes.
Yes. Sure. Real quick, there is not that you know how to, I realize a lot of people aren't familiar with Slack, and we'll try to invite you all to a channel that is called Assembly Line Code. And that's a great place to ask questions about code if you have them. That's all.
Yeah.
That was all I wanted to say.
Cool. Yeah, and there are a bunch of other channels called Assembly Line something or other that may be appropriate, and you can ask whether or not you think you should be there on Slack. The point is, explore between now and tomorrow's stand-up, and then at tomorrow's stand-up, we'll give some specific concrete tasks. But that's going to be easier if you've explored and played around, and to give some structure to that exploration, you can try to take a PDF and create an interview around that.
All right.
All right.
I got to head out.
I've got to jump. Anyone got any last minute questions? Thank you again. The fact that people haven't run away speaks well of everyone. I mean, if you did have to run away, that would be fine too. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what we can make together. All right. Cheers, all.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.